This is Dune Talk, a DuneNewsNet.com production. Join us now for the latest Dune news, reactions, and lively discussions.
Hey there, welcome to another episode of Dune Talk. This is the show with all the latest Dune news and in-depth reviews. Today, in addition to movie updates, we're taking a closer look at Dune Part One, the photography, and what its beautiful photos tell us about the first movie's deleted scenes. This is Marcus Gabriel, your editor at DuneNewsNet.com, and I'm looking forward to diving into the behind-the-scenes content with three fellow Dune experts.
Hey, you guys, it's Garin. Excited to be on today, and it's really interesting for us to kind of look at deleted scenes from the photography book and kind of speculate on why and what those may have added to the original film. So excited about it.
Hey everyone, thanks again for joining us. Yeah, like Garin said, I'm excited to dive in. Johnny Sobchak here, and it's a interesting episode, I think, because I actually haven't gotten the book yet, so I'm excited to kind of see more from it and hear the guys' perspectives, and I'll probably end up being convinced to buy it, I'm sure, by the end of the episode, but I'm excited to dive in.
Hi, it's Mark from DuneInfo here. Thanks for having me back on. Excited to talk about the book. It's Dune is the film that keeps on giving. Lots of still new information and new pictures coming from that film, even though it's been out a couple of years now.
Okay, so we're going to start with some movie news.
Dune movie news.
So let's just get the sad news out of the way first. So as you're probably aware by now, the wait for Dune Part 2's release has gotten longer. Co-producers Warner Brothers and Legendary have decided to delay the movie to March 15th, 2024, and this comes amid the still ongoing actors union strike. After 40 days, there's really no satisfactory resolution in sight. In fact, as we're recording, the negotiation has not yet resumed even. So if you're not familiar with that situation, we covered this plus implications of a delay for Dune 2 episodes ago. Johnny, as it stands now, it looks like Dune Part 2 won't have really much competition surrounding its new release dates. In a nutshell, what are your thoughts on March 15th?
Well, first, I guess I'll say is that, we're all disappointed. And I guess the good thing about this in terms of the announcement was that we kind of had an idea that it could be coming really at any moment. So it wasn't a total blindside. But, understand the reasons and hopefully it will benefit. I think personally, given the date that it's gotten, like you said, March 15th, I think it will ultimately be better financially for the film than if it had gone ahead and they didn't have the strikes resolved by the November 3rd release date, which all things considered, they may not be, realistically. So a lot of people are reacting like, oh my God, there's this movie, this Disney movie, this Snow White movie, and these other things. But ultimately, a lot of those movies are going to end up getting delayed, I think. Some of them already have been delayed. Godzilla versus Kong, for example, had Dune's date. And of course, it's a Legendary Warner Brothers production. They pushed that back a month to accommodate Dune. So I think all things considered, there's still going to be a lot of movement in terms of competition. And frankly, I think if there are other films out that come out before Dune, like a Kung Fu Panda movie, which I think is dated for that right now, like The Weekend Prior, and A Quiet Place, which is a little bit of a smaller type of film, although it is kind of sci-fi and action oriented. I think that Dune still would be kind of the premiere and like IMAX event, ultimately for financial purposes and for future Dune projects. This is probably the best bet. In a perfect world, it would have came out in November without the strikes ongoing and all that would have been resolved, but it just isn't how it's going to pan out, it seems. So I ultimately, I hope everyone feels just like they can hang in there and that it'll be worth it in the long run for just the prospects of the movie and how well it does. And it'll be worth the wait, I'm sure.
The LANDSRAAD High Council is now in session.
Dune Part 1, the photography, hit the shelves in the US on August 15th. This deluxe hardcover, comprising 282 color pages, features hundreds of the best photos taken by unit photographer Chiabella Jame. She was with the cast and crew throughout the whole production of Dune Part 1 in Hungary, Norway, Jordan, and the United Arab Emirates. Mark, the book actually released in the UK earlier for once. Would love to hear your overall thoughts on this publication and if you have any favorite photos.
Yeah, sure. So this is the book. I've taken the paper sleeve off. So I don't damage it. But it's a big book. If you've got the Art and Soul of Dune, it's pretty much the same size and dimensions of that. Beautiful book, high quality paper, high quality images in there. Some of the photos we've seen before because they are the official publicity photos. But when I was flipping through, the one that stopped me dead, which is one I know we're going to talk about later, is the one of Paul and Jessica, where Jessica's training Paul in voice and telling him to drink the flame. It's a scene that we know was in the script, but there was no evidence that it was filmed up until that photo. So that was a showstopper for me.
So as alluded to, the book contains many never-before-seen photos, some of which pertain to scenes that were deleted from the final film. And we're going to go through a number of these deleted scenes now in their likely chronological order. As we've mentioned before, based on a 2018 version of the Dune Part One script, the beginning of the movie could have been quite different. In that scenario, the movie begins with opening narration by Reverend Mother Mohiam, and we see a stylized mosaic on the wall of a Bene Gesserit temple. She's telling the history of the Imperium, starting with the Butlerian Jihad, and that sets the stage for the current balance of power with the three great schools and their dependence on the spice. The next shots would have been planet Arrakis among the stars, and then we see a stealth ship penetrating its upper atmosphere at incredible speeds. From below, it looks like a shooting star. On page 207 of the photography, we see a close-up on Jason Momoa. Behind the scenes, he's filming the next shot at Origo Studios in Budapest, Hungary. It's on the inside of that ship. He's a commando sitting at the back. He has an airtight helmet on with clear faceplate, and that ensures the wearer has good visibility. On the prior page, we see a photo of Momoa standing up from the rear. He's fully clad in that black dropsuit. Perhaps this is when he's just on his gear or is getting ready to jump. You really get a good feel for the level of details that went into creating this costume. It's well fitted, but looks very protective with padding at the joints. And then yes, the commando drops out of the speeding ship as it clears rocky cliffs and zooms up again. This is free fall with no parachute involved. The next part of the scene was shot in the desert of Wadi Rum in Jordan, as the commando uses his suspensor belt to slow down on that final descent towards the rocks. On page 17, we see the stunt double Kim Fardy as he's suspended in the air. Then we have that striking shot of Momoa from behind, overlooking the open deserts before him. At this point, it's revealed to the audiences that this is Duncan Idaho. Then he gets ready, heads off, looking for the Fremen. So I can just imagine like seeing the scene in a IMAX theater. That would have been incredible to see. It's interesting because this scene was going to happen like before the title was going to show. So it would be going to be like cut and then show the title screen and then continue from there. And it would have gone onto the Gom Jabbar scene immediately off the bat. So really a lot of changes from that version. In the end, though, I can see why Villeneuve and Walker decided to cut this from the movie. It makes an absolutely visually stunning opener. However, if you look at the current film as it was released, like how would you fit this between the expanded Caladan scenes that got into the final film? Maybe it would have like been awkward with the pacing at that point. It would have to be after Paul and Duncan speak in the hangar, and at that point, this scene doesn't feel as necessary anymore, considering there was so much other great stuff that was cut from the movie in the end. Having said that, like I was thinking back about some of the comments that Momo has made about, like he would love to see a 6-hour cut of the Dune movie. We know that a 6-hour cut it doesn't exist, but there certainly is a lot of footage that we haven't seen. Like I'm keep thinking back to what would have been like if Dune was filmed as an HBO series, like that you had the whole like first half of the book filmed as like an 8 to 10 episode run, sort of like Game of Thrones. I could imagine that like scenes like this would make perfect episode openings.
Opening that would have been visually just stunning, and for an IMAX experience, it would have been amazing. But there's something I think really significant about some of the first imagery and characters that you see in a film, and the fact that Duncan Idaho dies in part one, and don't worry, there's more. But but he dies in part one. And yet, if we're opening with that character, to the uninitiated, that might clue them into, oh, is this my main character? Is this the person I'm following? Or it raises the level of importance of that character. Not that Duncan isn't an important character, because he's very important, but I just think they made the right decision in starting, especially with Chani's opening narration sequence of the background of Arrakis. I thought that was brilliantly done, even though I really would like to see this as you described it. I'm envisioning it. I'm like, yeah, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I totally agree with Garin. I think that it was the right decision. I mean, yes, I would love to see this. I think it would have been very, very cool. And I had it really in my mind, I think, for a long time, going back to those years like 2020, 2021, that this would be potentially the opening of the movie. But I think, yeah, in the context of the overall story and also like part one as a isolated kind of piece of storytelling, I think that the opening with Chani and that exposition, the Harkonnens and Arrakis, and just all those little details that we get right at the front, like that makes it so clear what's important and what's happening. And as cool as this would have looked, and Duncan, yes, he is important, and I think it would have been fitting in some ways if he was the first character in the Dune universe that we got to see on screen in this adaptation. I think that, yeah, it would have been a little bit awkward, either just as an opening or even trying to fitting it in, yeah, later in the kind of sequence of events that we know we actually get in part one. And I think Denis Villeneuve said something along the lines of like, once he deletes a scene or cuts a scene, like it's just dead, like he doesn't have any reverence or emotion for it. So I think that's something I guess we could all consider moving forward, is that most likely we're never going to see this stuff, I think is the safe bet, but you never know.
One thing that's interesting as well is that this Duncan drop scene, part of it was filmed against an LED wall, which is a technology that Greg Fraser helped pioneer on The Mandalorian. And so that was the only shot in the movie that used LED walls, and it was cut.
Mark, do you think that was maybe a reason? Is Villeneuve, a traditionalist, and he didn't want to do that? Do you think?
Possibly. I think he said that it didn't fit with the look of the rest of the film or the tone of the rest of the film. So I don't think he's necessarily against the technology, but he's very much he likes the physicality of scenes. He said, the way that the light falls on a table or something like that. He likes the randomness of filming.
The photograph that I'm going to talk about now from the photography book is on page 98. And this is from a deleted scene, which is a pretty exciting one. And this shows Paul and Jessica in a stance where they're fighting each other. It looks like Paul has a blade near Jessica's face, and she's deflecting that, and their arms are kind of in aggressive posture as they're fighting each other. And why this is really significant to me is this is actually one deleted scene that I really missed, having been a fan of the book. Because the whole notion that Paul was trained by Jessica, trained in the ways of the Bene Gesserit, which is incredible control of breathing and muscles and movement and thought, and it's this discipline on a level that is beyond really anything that we're familiar with, and that he was trained from a young boy in this type of fighting, and there's a lot of significance to that, even in part one. In the end, when Paul fights Jamis, and how significant that is that he was trained, in that discipline of fighting. So this is a scene it's a beautiful shot. It's obviously it looks like it's on Caladan. Can you guys tell me if that's likely Caladan?
It is, yeah. There's another photo of them fighting, and in the background of that one, which isn't in the book, it's in the Art of So book, but you can see the Caladan fireplace just in the background. So presumably this is from the same shot. It looks like Caladan carpets as well. So
that's right.
Local manufacturer.
this is just a relationship and a part of the development of Paul as a character that I missed. And I understand, Villeneuve has to make decisions. He has to be able to, he can't include everything. That's all directors and editors have to deal with this fact. But just that this part of the book is something that has always, and still today, is an element of Frank Herbert's writing that I love. I love the way he allows you to picture this level of discipline of the human body in a way that creates a lethal killing machine, but that's not always what they choose to do. The Bene Gesserit sometimes choose to use the voice. They choose to use other methods and tools to get what they want, not always violence. And that's even something that was written into the script from 2018 that we believe was likely legitimate. And so this scene was left out. But for me as a fan, I miss it. And so seeing this image, which Mark, you alluded to earlier, my heart stopped as well. I was like, oh, I would have loved to have seen this included in the final version of Villeneuve's film. The other shot that I want to talk about is on page 141 of the photography book, is Jessica and Paul meditating, and this is at Arrakeen on Arrakis, and this scene was not included. But again, this is along the same lines of the other shot that I just got done talking about, that would have helped us to understand the level of training and mind control and body control that Jessica was sharing with Paul, that she really was training him in the ways of the Bene Gesserit, which perhaps, again, to someone not familiar with the story, I guess this could have introduced some potential confusion. I guess that's possible, but I just think this is such an important part. The Bene Gesserit and their ways and methods are really an important part of the whole story, as are the Bene Gesserit themselves. And so I just think it would have added a dimension of richness. And it just, in the final cut of part one, it just doesn't, it alludes to this stuff. It alludes to this level of attention that Jessica was giving to Paul, but it would have been really amazing to see it. And with the imagery and music and the emotion of that. So again, just even the control of muscle movement and breathing and thoughts and all of that stuff that we get in the book, which we actually get to see and understand the character's thinking, which is the advantage of the book. But there's no one that has done a better job of helping us get into the minds of the characters than Villeneuve with part one and even his other movies for that matter. So this is another scene that I really would have loved to have seen, and now we see this happening on Arrakeen, in the palace, and I just think that would have been really exciting.
I think perhaps one of the reasons why those scenes were cut is they're almost duplication of stuff that we've seen. It's like we've seen Paul train with Gurney. So do we need another Paul training knife fight scene? And we've already been introduced to the voice with the Gom Jabbar scene. Do we need to see Paul learning that? I'd love to have seen these scenes, absolutely, but I can kind of see why they could have been thought redundant.
Yeah, Mark, I think Garin summarized the feelings of why we'd want to see it very well. But I think, Mark, you're right in terms of just kind of redundancy, or like what don't we need? And I think you need the Gurney fight scene. You need that training moment with him to just really set up that character at all and the relationship between him and Paul. You can't really afford to cut that. And then in terms, I think of, I certainly understand people are like, I wish we got a little bit more like Bene Gesserit training with Paul, because we don't have like a ton, outside of what happens like with him and Jessica earlier in the movie at the breakfast scene, and then of course the Gom Jabbar scene. But I think the Gom Jabbar scene in particular does such a great job of highlighting the intensity and like the importance of this training that Paul has done with Jessica. Just between like the dialogue that we get with the Reverend Mother, and then also I think what's so brilliant about that Gom Jabbar scene is it sets up that, you know, Paul's been through some sort of training and Jessica has taught him all these different things that she knows. And then it goes into this cross-cutting sequence where we have Paul going through it with the Reverend Mother, and then on the outside we have Jessica kind of just imagining what he's going through and kind of like expressing that as they're kind of both going through the litany and everything. And I think it's really done in a very, like, I guess it could be seen as a little bit too subtle, but it's kind of more subtle. And of course, with the cross-cutting and the images that we see like inside Paul's mind, like it's a very like cinematic kind of way of going about that. And I just think like this second photo that Garin was describing, it would have been very cool. And I'm sure they would have come up with some sort of ways to flesh it out and really make it interesting for the audience. But I could see it being a little bit too, I guess, like maybe not like cinematic enough, I guess, like just having to stop and like sit with these two characters and have them go through this little training moment where they're sitting together and just going through the techniques and whatnot. So I can see why, but yeah, I think this will be kind of a tired message by the end, but we would love to see this stuff. But I also understand it so far why these particular things wouldn't have made it in ultimately. This image on page 179 that I chose, it's kind of a distant shot looking at the huge kind of cavernous Arakeen keep, and there's this huge corridor where it's hard to tell the way that they film it and how it appears in the movie versus behind the scenes, how many of these areas they actually constructed or used, because it, you know, especially the way the angles are done and the different stairs that they kind of use at different parts of it, it's hard to know. But essentially we have Duncan, Idaho, or Jason Momoa as Duncan, Idaho, where he's walking through this huge corridor in the Arakeen residency, and it's like basically pitch black, except there's this one single light source essentially moving alongside of Jason Momoa, and you can see I can't remember exactly what member of the crew this would be kind of pushing this, but it's like some sort of cart with this huge light that would be one of those kind of glow globes and more elongated kind of floating lights, and it's moving next to him. And the interesting thing about this, I mean, as a photo and kind of as an insight behind the scenes, I think it's beautiful and gives you an idea in particular of like the scale of the sets. And even though it's so dark and there's only this one light source in this particular image, you can just see the little details, the designs, like the ornate, you know, rug that's on there, the carpet that's on the ground, and the walls, and kind of how the different little stone details are kind of put in there. But in terms of what this scene would actually be, I'm more curious to hear what you book experts think of this, because I'm not really sure where this might fit into the overall story. If there's maybe something from the novel that this might tie back to more specifically, because there's not anything with, you know, the little bits that we get of Duncan, you know, in the residency with everyone. There's not anything that really like stands out to me outside of maybe before or after like the dinner scene, maybe like the kind of the scene that we know, of course, is very famous from the book, and then it was kind of shuffled in and out of the movie, where Duncan is drunk and he's kind of like tired, you know, just walking around and kind of going on this little rant. But yeah, I'm not sure. It's interesting, definitely, and I would have loved to have seen some more Duncan, especially if this was maybe tying into some other scene that we're not aware of. But yeah, I'm curious what you all think.
Yeah, there's no evidence to that, but that's also the first thing that came to mind for me. That, you know, like you know, after the dinner scene, Duncan returns. He's drunk and is basically. It may have confused people, but it would have also given some more character development to him, like, you know, put understanding of like the situation that they're in, and maybe like reactions of Jessica or another character who like observes him, like, because we also see one shot. I don't think it was in this book, but you see a shot of like Jessica also walking in a long corridor, and that's one in the red dress. I wonder if she notices something off about Duncan. So yeah, that would have been interesting.
Yeah, it's unusual because he's got his jacket on. He hasn't got his swords on, so it's not during the attack on the palace. Mm-hmm. So yeah, Drunken Idaho is the only scene that comes to my mind as well. But it might have just been hey, this will be a cool shot, and just get it and see if it would fit in the movie somewhere. Who knows?
Okay, well, let's move on to this is on page 143. This is a shot showing Dr. Yueh and Jessica, and what is happening right here is they're at the top of the stairs, which you'll be familiar with from the final cut of Part One, where this is shortly before Leto is attacked and hit by the projectile. But this is before then, but it's on that staircase that you'll remember from the film. And the lighting's just a little bit different, but Dr. Yueh and Jessica are looking out through the thin, narrow windows out. And what they're doing is they're watching the group that's going out to inspect the spice fields. So an ornithopter is lifting off. Now, we're not seeing that in this shot right here as I'm describing it, but this is what apparently they're looking at. And they're having, this is the conversation from the book that you'll remember if you've read the book, and that is where Dr. Yueh reveals that his wife Wana was taken by the Harkonnen, and really he doesn't describe exactly what happens, but that they tortured her and did things to her that are unspeakable. So this is a scene that I see why not as much time was spent on this, but there again, I think it could have provided a lot more depth into Yueh's motivation.
I would just say my only kind of brief thought on this is, I think this is the one scene that's been alluded to or that we've gotten some glimpses of in this book or other sources or materials where I genuinely do wonder, like, why didn't they include it? And the only reason for that I feel that way is that I think if you got this one additional scene with Yueh, that it would have added just that little extra texture and kind of depth to that character and like his motivation. It would also give you a little bit more of a, almost like not foreshadowing necessarily, but kind of like it's planting that seed that he's, vulnerable and that he may be a liability. And so, yeah, I genuinely wonder, like, this would be the one I would ask if I got the chance to talk to Villeneuve. I'd be like, why didn't you include that scene? Like, what was the reason, like, for cutting it, or like, where would it have fit in the movie, or, what was the ultimate decision there? Because it also seems like it would have been a fairly short or quick sequence as well. And I'm just wondering, maybe if it was an instance of it was just too awkward to fit it in, or they couldn't find like the right flow or space in the edit. But yeah, it's just, I think that's the one more than any where I'm like, if we had gotten that little extra with Yueh, I think that would have been, almost perfect.
Yeah, Dr. Yueh doesn't get an awful lot of screen time. This scene was cut. The scene where he gives Paul the Orange Catholic Bible was cut as well. One of my favorite lines is when Paul says, "Why is Dr. Yueh here?" Almost as if he's like, what's this character doing here? He's barely in the film. So yeah, it seems like they've just tried to streamline that character out, because ultimately he exits the film and is not a key part of the film after that. So I can only assume that they were just trying to minimize a character that ultimately you're going to forget about. My photos, my section. The first one is on page 192, and this is the director, Denis Villeneuve, and he's bending over and he's talking to Rebecca Ferguson as Jessica, who's bound and gagged, and she's lying on the floor in the Arrakeen Palace. We can see the massive slit windows where orange light is coming in, so this photograph is very textured and very orangey. not sure if it would have looked like that in the film. And this is a scene where the Baron comes in and he knows that Jessica's awake because he says that Dr. Yueh has timed the drug precisely, and he apologizes that she's bound, but he's well aware of Jessica's power of the voice. And that's basically it. It's a very short scene. And it would have been the only scene that we'd have with Jessica and the Baron. Coincidentally, in the David Lynch film, even though that scene is in there, you never see the Baron and Jessica in the same shot. Whether or not they were filmed on different days or what, but there's no shot of that. And also on a page 193, the next page, we see a slightly different shot of Rebecca Ferguson still bound and gagged, but there's the cast and crew sort of milling around, almost seemingly have forgotten that poor Rebecca is still bound on the floor. And what's interesting in this photo is in the background, you can actually see the Baron's legs in his suit, his armored suit, which is something that we don't actually see in the film very much, apart from floating in the background. And there is also a photo on the page 164 where we actually see Stellan Skarsgård in the suit, proving that he did wear the suit at some point, because where we see him other times, he's floating, and that was a stuntman. Oddly, on page 164, where he's chatting with Oscar Isaac, but the Baron hasn't got his makeup on. So whether or not he would have just been filmed from the waist down, which is possible for the scene with Jessica bound on the floor, perhaps we'd only see his feet. It's unclear, but it would have bene a nice scene to sort of show the power that the Baron's got over Jessica and his awareness of the Bene Gesserit's power, and explain why Jessica is gagged but not Paul in the Thopter. But again, probably cut for time. And there's finally on a page 196, we see Denis Villeneuve sat on the same on the floor in the same set, contemplating this scene. It looks to be exactly the same scene, the carpet, the lighting. So that would have been an interesting scene, but not to be.
This is almost the exact opposite of my feeling about the Yueh scene. So this is one where there's absolutely like no purpose to it, in my opinion. Like, I think it would have been cool in some respects, like, oh, the Baron and Jessica, like, okay. But like, you can just take them to the Thopter. They're there. Don't need to see how that happened or why we get it. And yeah, I think the orange lighting and like the way the scene is shot, like just from what we see in these photos, is really neat. I love Villeneuve sitting back and kind of just like probably talking to Rebecca Ferguson or admiring the setup. But yeah, I think honestly, in some ways, I prefer that the Baron and Jessica don't interact or come into contact in the first movie. I think that makes it a little bit more interesting, or has maybe some sort of significance, perhaps setting up for part two. But I think that this is a perfect example of all the reasons why you would not include something.
So I'm going to disagree on this one. So I'm going to allude to something that might be unfair here, but because of those of you that have read the book and know the story, seeing them together to me would have had some significance to it, and albeit it would have needed to be very brief, okay, and that's all right. But it reminds me of and hopefully you'll see the parallels here. But just, when Princess Leia is first captured, in the original Star Wars, and Darth Vader comes in, and there's that little floating thing with the needle and everything, and it's just a quick brief scene, but here's our ultimate villain and our princess, as it were, right? And I just think it would have been significant to what's going to happen later in the story, as some of you already know, to have seen them together and to sort of put a fine point on this. The Harkonnen now are in power, and the Baron has ultimate power right now, and just a symbol of that, because she's bound and gagged on the floor, as vulnerable as you can possibly be. So I would have liked to have seen this, and I think it would have added a lot to perhaps what's later coming. So on this one, Johnny, I would have wanted to see it included.
The next photo is on page 202 and takes place during the aftermath of the Harkonnens' assault on Arrakeen. We see that Thufir Hawat, played by Stephen McKinley Henderson, has been captured. This is likely connected to another scene in the script where the Atreides Mentat is brought before the Baron. Here the Baron deceives Thufir regarding who the traitor was. He lies that it was Lady Jessica and all part of the Bene Gesserit Order's plans. Then he actually outright asks Thufir to join House Harkonnen. Of course, Thufir's initial reaction is, "You can't be serious." The Baron is crafty, however, and emphasizes that Thufir stands to gain unlimited knowledge, considering the vast financial resources of the Harkonnens. Remember that Mentats are human computers, and a computer is only as useful as the data available to it. I can see why this scene was cut, since their discussion also references Fade, and Villeneuve states that his decision was to keep some mysteries for the second movie, including this character. This isn't the only deleted scene that may have involved Thufir, who actually ended up having a relatively minor role in the first movie. On page 132, there's a shot of Timothée Chalamet and Stephen McKinley Henderson together in Paul's bedroom. This would have been interesting both from character development perspective and also knowing that Paul was trained as a Mentat. In the end, however, with these cuts, the final film offered very little background about the Mentats. Hopefully, like the Guild, this key school will be expanded on during Part 2.
This is one where it's more so kind of like looking behind the scenes and getting a little bit more into the Harkonnen kind of structure and some of the people that make that world spin around. We have the technicians, the Harkonnen technicians, with Dave Bautista as Raban. On page 173, kind of the first glimpse we get is this photograph where we have the in the list of individuals here. So we have makeup artists, prosthetic makeup artists, treating them, giving them their ghostly kind of complexion, and that is I'm sure I'm going to mispronounce some of these, so bear with me, but Nikki de Jong, Marta Antal, and Athena Sapanides provide the final touch-ups to extras playing the Harkonnen scientists. So we get this really cool, and what I love about this shot, what makes it so cool to me is it gives you like more of a glimpse into like the life and like the day-to-day of being like on a film set and like on a backlot, because you have these three, almost alien looking Harkonnens, and they have their backs to the camera in this particular image, but then you have these women just wearing their usual like daily attire, and they have their makeup brushes in hand, and they have their sunglasses up so they can get a better look, and they're treating them. And so it's just such a fun kind of casual like image, just them at work. And then, but behind that, you have other crew members, you have other Harkonnen soldiers just standing around talking. And then even behind them, you see there's the landing craft kind of set from a completely different section or time in the movie where the Atreides are landing and coming out. And so, that's just you never think of it when you're watching the movie necessarily, but there's all these different locations and sets and props and the crew members just kind of intermingling. And of course, the nature of shooting movies just out of order and kind of moving back and forth. So I think that one is a particularly fun photo. And then on page 176, we also get an image, kind of a close-up kind of framing of one of the technicians in particular, and we get a little bit more detail of the kind of gown and like the costume. It kind of reminds me of the gown that in Blade Runner 2049, like in the morgue kind of area, David Desmalchin's character, for example, they kind of have that same futuristic kind of look to it. And then on page 177, the very next page, we get Daniel Scott Smith as, I think, that same Harkonnen technician with Dave Bautista. And this is the particular scene that I think that we didn't necessarily get of more of those folks coming in to kind of clean up and take care of the Baron after the attack and after the Baron is injured or damaged by the gas. So I think I love the little kind of mask that comes over. Again, that's another kind of costume prop there. I just love all the different I know people really have an affinity for the David Lynch kind of Baroque, very strange aesthetic, especially when it comes to the Harkonnens. But for me, I admire that stuff, and I actually haven't sat down and watched the entire David Lynch Dune yet, so I will be doing that. But I just also really like, and personally, I guess, prefer this almost. I don't even know what the exact description would be or like term you would use, but like it's just this futuristic, but still like fairly grounded, like kind of simplified, streamlined designs that they use for some of this stuff, and just a simple piece of like presumably plastic that they take and put over this technician's face, and he has like the high collar, gown on. I just think it just really works, and it looks especially kind of clean in these black and white photos, and their complexion is very light as well, contrasting with Raban's armor, for example, and whatnot. So I would have been curious how that, I guess, maybe what their thought was, or like how that scene was going to fit into the final film. Presumably, it would have maybe given some more context to the Baron going from being injured and being taken in like into this bath, and then like maybe assisting him or like cleaning up, in the aftermath of the attack. But yeah, I'm curious to see, or if you are familiar with any other reason or what the scene might have been. But I think it would have been neat to see just a little bit more of the Harkonnens, I guess, and they're taking over after the destruction.
Yeah. So that particular decontamination cell scene is in one of the earlier scripts, and it is after the Baron has been injured, and he's in a cell which I don't think we can see in any of the photos. And Raban's asking, what's happened, and the technicians say he's been injured, but they're working on him. And Raban asks, will he survive? And one of the technicians says, do you want him to survive? And Raban sort of says, if he doesn't survive, I'm going to kill you and all your family, I think, something like that. So
that's right.
It would have a nice little scene to sort of show the loyalty, I guess, of Raban to his uncle. He was in a position to potentially take power, but he either didn't want to or was loyal to his uncle. So it would have been fun, but again, another scene that we don't really need.
I'd like to believe, you guys, that we're going to see so much more of the Harkonnen society and Gidi Prime in part 2, that maybe we'll see these guys. Maybe there's some part of the story where they'll just be in the background, or they'll be a part of seeing the scenes of the Baron or others, because as Villeneuve has described, we're going to see a lot more of the Harkonnen in part 2, but we didn't really see a lot of them in part 1. It was really brief scenes and not very many actual characters, which actually kind of goes along with the book. But it'll be nice to see that the Harkonnen side, that faction fleshed out more in part 2. So I don't know how these decisions are made, because these scenes are very costly, and you're paying actors, and then it gets cut. I know this is part of filmmaking, right? But could they have maybe determined they didn't need these scenes before they shot them? I guess that's the $1 million question, and it's hard to do. I'm sure. I don't pretend to know how to do it any better than the professionals. So.
Yeah, and thinking of the characterization of Raban in the scene, that would have been an interesting moment, because there is that aspect of him being loyal to the Baron. Like he doesn't want the Baron to die, and I mean he could have taken power, but I wonder if also at the back of his mind he was thinking of fate in a way, like what happens if the Baron dies, because we don't know like that much about the relationship between Raban and Fade, and like how the power struggle potentially would have ensued after that. So I'm wondering if it was also part of Raban like not wanting to like get out of this current situation of security that he's in, where he's going to be reinstated as governor of Arrakis, and if the Baron is gone, like is that up for grabs?
Better the Baron, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good thought, Marcus.
Okay, so the next set of photographs, we stay with the Baron, and the Baron is in his healing bath, which we've discussed before. And in an earlier version of the script, the Baron would have asked Raban to sell the spice stock slowly to pay for the invasion. And Rabban would have said he can't because the Atreides have destroyed them, and that would have been a completely other different deleted scene, which I'm not even sure was filmed. There's a concept art for that. But in this scene, the Baron would have been angry and risen from the bath and thrown stuff around the room. So what we have in this photograph is the Baron in bath scene, which we're familiar from the final film. But the Baron is above the bath and there's rigging for the Baron. So we see him naked from behind and he has risen from the bath. Where, you know, in full suspensor mode, effectively, which we see earlier in the film when he says, my desert, my Dune thing. So perhaps they decided to do his suspensor stuff earlier. So that was on page 160. And on page 167, we see the Baron again, and it looks like some sort of David Copperfield trick where a steel pole is going through his entire body, and there's cables suspending him on there. And we've got makeup technicians squeezing oil over his head to drench him in the oil for the scene where he rises out of the bath. And what I liked about this picture is it reminds me very much of a scene from David Lynch's Dune, where the Baron is rising up and he goes underneath the oil shower just before he attacks the slave boy. So that visual of the Baron rising, drenched in oil, very similar, and perhaps one of the reasons why they decided to cut it, because it does look and feel very, very similar to the Lynch film.
Yeah, the thought I have, Mark, about not resembling things that David Lynch had already done. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. I mean, you don't want your creative vision to overlap with someone else's, and I think it's really possible that once they kind of got into this and they began to say, wait, this has some real similarities to Lynch's depiction of the Baron, that maybe we won't emphasize that as much. So, it's a real possibility.
Then the final photo we're going to look at is more of an honorable mention. So on page 152, we get a scene where we have Denis Villeneuve and we have Josh Brolin and Oscar Isaac, and it appears to be like a moment of downtime between the scenes. You see that the costumer Brad Holtzman is working on Oscar Isaac's costume, getting ready, and it feels is again nice to see how the life was on set, like in between takes. It looks like that they were having like having fun and like having great interactions with each other's. And I think that's one of the great things about this book, how it really captured those moments of how the film was created that otherwise you wouldn't have seen as much of. But the interesting thing in this scene is that we see Oscar Isaac. He has the Baliset in his hand, and that makes me think about one of the first interviews when like the first trailer from Dune Part One came out about it was asking Josh Brolin if he plays the Baliset, and he was talking about like how unfortunately like it was cut out of the film, and he was so sad about it. But he also told a story that when the Baliset first came on set, it was actually Oscar Isaac who grabbed it, and he like played it beautifully, and that sort of discouraged Brolin in a way.
So here's my theory, you guys. So maybe Oscar Isaac is the better guitar player, and so Josh Brolin is recording what Oscar Isaac is doing. And because of the delay in the film to 2024, Josh Brolin will be able to practice even more to be able to upstage his previous fellow actor. So I don't know. There's got to be some ego involved in some of these talents that they have, right?
Yeah, Austin Butler did Elvis as well, so maybe they can have a guitar fight at the end or something.
Yeah, so that's our show for this week. We're gonna wrap it up here, but yeah, these aren't the only deleted scenes that were cut from the movie. Let us know in the comments. Like, were there any of these that you would most have wanted to see in a film, or from these, or any of the other ones that you've heard of? Would be interesting to hear your thoughts as well.
Thanks for having me back on again. It's been a fun time talking about the photographs. Disappointing week for various reasons, but great to be on and talking Dune with you guys. If anyone wants to follow me, I'm on all the socials at DuneInfo.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us again, Mark. Always great to have you. And yes, it's been a weird week and just a weird whole production cycle, I feel like, for both of these movies. That's typical Dune, though. I think we've already said that. But Johnny Sobchak here again. Always great to be with the crew and talk about whatever we have to talk about at this point. We'll see how much we have to talk about in the next few months. But thanks for watching as always, and you can find me on Twitter, Letterboxd, Instagram at Johnny Sobchak.
Hey, it's Garin. Thanks again for joining. It's been fun to look at these deleted scenes and speculate on why they weren't included. You can find me on Twitter at Dune Companion. But I even though I am disappointed about the delay in the film, I really think it could end up being a good thing in the end. So where there's adversity, there can be a lot of good things come out of it. So
yeah, it's definitely been a long week, and definitely feel the disappointment. At the same time, we are still going to be getting a lot of Dune content over the next weeks and months. Some of the things that were scheduled, for example, the Empire magazine, which we're going to talk about next, they're still moving ahead, so we're going to get some nice insights out of there. Some nice books coming out, games, so a lot of stuff, and then of course the marketing will hopefully start up towards the end of the year again. We're not going anywhere. You're going to be seeing a lot more Dune Talk as well. For now, take care.
We hope you've enjoyed Dune Talk. Remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you know when the next episode drops. Stay tuned to DuneNewsNet.com and add us to your social feeds. Be the first to hear breaking news and reviews.